No shelter, no tools, no hope becomes survival's ultimate test as acid rain hisses and 200 km/h winds batter Araxis 4 inside her fragile basalt dome. Lieutenant Mara clings to Earth wisdom. Structure must breathe, yet hold. Her shelter shudders, lashings strain. But while alien constructions shatter outside, her primitive human ingenuity endures the storm's merciless fury intact. Lieutenant Mara Hayes stood motionless at the edge of the desolate basin. Her eyes narrowed against the fine mist of acid drizzle that had already begun to eat tiny holes into the outer layer of her expedition suit. The landscape of Araxis 4 stretched before her, barren, wind-scoured, and utterly hostile. Occasional gusts of wind whipped around her, carrying stinging particles that reminded her this was not a world that welcomed life. 18 hours, she muttered to herself, checking the chronometer embedded in her wristband. Dawn to midnight. It was all the time allocated for this phase of the Coalition Survival Exchange trial, designed to test the very limits of adaptability and resourcefulness across species. The acid rain intensified slightly, and Mara tugged the hood of her suit tighter. As humanity's sole representative in this particular trial, she knew all eyes would be watching. Earth's integration into the Galactic Coalition was still fragile, still questioned by older member species who saw humans as brash newcomers with more ambition than wisdom. Nearby, 3 distinct groups of alien cadets were organizing themselves with varying degrees of urgency and confidence. The Kristenstall, angular beings with silicon-based physiology that reflected the pale light in prismatic patterns, huddled together, their crystalline appendages clinking softly as they conferred. Their natural bodies formed living geological structures, and they seemed confident in this environment. Not far from them, the Virel moved with fluid grace, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with colors that conveyed complex emotional states to others of their kind. Currently, most glowed with confidence and even superiority, the blue-green of certainty mixed with the gold of anticipated triumph. The third group, the Pharans, were perhaps the most technologically dependent. Their metallic exoskeletons harnessed magnetic fields for manipulation and locomotion, making them formidable engineers. Already, Mara noticed several of them subtly accessing small devices tucked into their exoskeletons' behavior that bordered on cheating, according to the trial's strict no-technology rules. Attention, survival candidates! A drone's mechanized voice cut through the thin atmosphere. Your objective is clear. Construct a non-technological, stormproof shelter before nightfall. Those who fail to achieve adequate protection will face elimination from the Coalition Officer Candidacy Program. The drone hovered menacingly, its cameras recording every movement. Reminder: advanced tools, prefabricated materials, and communications technology are strictly forbidden. You have your minimal ration packs. The rest is up to your ingenuity. Mara felt her pocket where the small package of concentrated nutrients sat enough to keep her functioning, but nothing more. No shelter equipment, no tools beyond what she could fashion herself. This was a test of primal survival skills, deliberately designed to strip away technological advantages and reveal the true adaptability of each species. Your trial begins now, the drone announced. Immediately, the alien cadets burst into frenzied activity. The Kristans rushed toward a distant outcropping of minerals, their crystalline bodies glinting as they moved. The Virel spread out in a coordinated pattern, searching for materials, their skin flashing with tactical signals. The Pharans activated the magnetic fields in their exoskeletons, already attempting to attract and manipulate metallic particles in the soil. Mara did not move, not yet. Her training had taught her the value of observation before action. Rushing blindly forward was how you ended up dead in hostile environments. Instead, she crouched down, examining the soil beneath her feet, feeling its composition between her fingers. Acidic, she noted, testing it against her pH-sensitive suit patch. But workable. Her eyes tracked the wind patterns, watching how the acid rain fell and how the dust moved across the basin. Unlike her alien competitors, who were focused on gathering materials immediately, Mara was mapping the environment in her mind, searching for patterns and anomalies that might prove useful. A gust of wind carried a familiar scent, something organic. Following it, she discovered sparse fungal growths clinging to the underside of rocky overhangs. She pinched a small sample, testing its moisture content between her fingers. "Water reservoirs," she murmured, "and possibly fibrous enough for binding." In the distance, she heard a shout of frustration. One of the Virel had slipped into a shallow pool of toxic runoff, their luminescent skin immediately darkening where the caustic liquid made contact. Two others pulled their comrade free, but the damage was visible. A portion of their outer membrane was already beginning to dissolve. Meanwhile, the Kristans were having their own troubles. In their haste to break off pieces of crystal formations to use as building blocks, several had shattered their harvested bricks into useless fragments. Their frustrated chiming, the sound their bodies made when agitated, echoed across the basin. "Don't let fear rush your hands," Mara whispered, recalling her mentor's words from wilderness survival, training back on Earth. That was the challenge now, the balance between urgency and careful planning. With acid rain intensifying and only 18 hours until judgment, the pressure to begin building immediately was immense. Yet, something told her to continue her reconnaissance. Survival wasn't just about building shelter. It was about building the right shelter in the right place. As she moved methodically along the basin's edge, scanning for resources and hazards, Mara felt torn between the growing anxiety of time passing and the critical need to understand her environment fully. The silicon-based Kristan leader noticed her methodical approach and made a sharp, dismissive gesture. "The human wastes precious time," the translator drone hovering nearby interpreted. "When the storm comes, she will be washed away." Mara ignored the taunt, focusing instead on a strange formation in the distance, a grove of columnar structures rising from the basin floor. As she approached, her heart quickened. What at first appeared to be ordinary rock columns revealed themselves as hollow basalt tubes, formed by ancient volcanic activity and sculpted by eons of acid rain. More importantly, their interiors were lined with dense mats of fibrous roots from long-dead plant life that had once colonized this now barren world. "Perfect," she breathed, running her fingers along the inside of one column. The fibrous mat was tough, yet flexible, ideal for insulation and binding. The hollow basalt itself would provide structural elements that could withstand the pressure of high winds. As Mara began carefully harvesting lengths of the basalt tubes and stripping sections of the root mats, she noticed the wind changing direction. The acid rain was falling at a steeper angle now, and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. The warning signs of the coming storm were unmistakable. With materials gathered, she selected her building site a slight depression against a rock formation that would provide partial shelter from the prevailing winds. As she began splitting the basalt pipes into workable lengths for beams, she felt eyes on her. "Primitive methods for a primitive species," came a translated comment from a passing Farron engineer, who was using magnetic fields to levitate small metal rods into a crude cubic shape. Though impressive in its way, Mara noted that the structure lacked proper anchoring against the strengthening winds. If technology is forbidden, why do they allow the Farrons to use magnetic manipulation? She wondered aloud. But she knew the answer. The Farrons' abilities were biological, not technological. Just as the Kristans could grow and shape their silicon bodies, the Farrons could generate and control magnetic fields naturally. Humans had no such innate advantages. What Mara had was adaptability, creativity, and a deep understanding of basic physical principles that had allowed her species to survive on Earth long before they developed advanced technology. As she carefully lashed basalt beams together with twisted strips of root mat. She caught snippets of derisive commentary from the Christians. "Wood and stone approach," one chimed, the translator drone struggling to capture the nuances of their crystalline language. "Prehistoric methodology." Mara tightened a lashing against a sudden gust of wind. "If they sleep in the rain, let them," she muttered to herself. "I'll earn my survival with sweat, not circuits." By mid-afternoon, the basic framework of her shelter was taking shape, a dome-like structure anchored securely to the ground with basalt stakes. Its framework consisting of interlocking beams, secured with the tough, fibrous root mat bindings. The wind had strengthened considerably, and several times she had to pause to reinforce her work against sudden gusts. In the distance, she could see the alien cadets struggling with their own constructions. The Varel had woven intricate shell-like structures from harvested mineral fibers, but they seemed too light to withstand serious wind. The Farron's magnetic constructions were precise, but rigid, lacking the flexibility to absorb and redirect wind force. The Christians had the most substantial shelter, essentially extensions of their own bodies, but they had built on exposed ground without proper anchoring. Mara continued methodically, laying the root mat insulation between the basalt beams, creating a waterproof and acid-resistant layer. Every joint was double secured, every beam tested for strength before she moved on. A sudden micro-tornado, a common phenomenon on Araxes 4, swept across the basin without warning. Mara flung herself against her partially completed shelter, bracing it against the wind. One corner buckled under the pressure, a hairline crack appearing in a basalt beam. When the wind subsided, she quickly reinforced the damaged section with wedges cut from spare basalt fragments, working with careful precision despite her racing heart. The structure had held barely, but it would need additional reinforcement to survive the night. As she worked to strengthen the compromised section, a flash of bioluminescence caught her attention. One of the Virel cadets was approaching, its skin pulsing with the purple-red pattern that indicated distress. "Human," the translator drone interpreted as the alien drew near. "My shell weave dissolves in rising acid levels. The structural integrity fails." Mara glanced at the Virel shelter in the distance. Indeed, the mineral fibers they had harvested were breaking down in the increasingly caustic rain, the entire structure sagging dangerously. "I cannot assist," Mara replied carefully. "The rules forbid collaboration." The Virel's skin darkened to deep indigo, sign of desperation. According to Mara's xenobiology briefings, not collaboration, merely material exchange, one binding strand. Mara hesitated. The trial rules were explicit. Each candidate was to survive entirely on their own merit. Assisting others could result in disqualification. Yet her conscience rebelled at the thought of leaving the Virel to face the coming storm in a dissolving shelter. In that moment, she made her choice. Reaching into her pocket, she extracted one of her spare root mat lashing strip sewn she had set aside for redundancy in her own roof. "Take it," she said quietly. "But I never gave it to you." The Virel's skin flashed momentarily with gold gratitude before returning to a neutral blue. Without another word, it retreated toward its failing shelter, the precious lashing strip concealed within its membranous grasp. As dusk approached, Mara completed the final reinforcements to her shelter. The dome was low to the ground, its entrance facing away from the prevailing winds, its interior just large enough for her to sit comfortably. She had lined the floor with a thick layer of root mat insulation and created a small drainage channel to direct any water seepage away from where she would rest. Darkness fell rapidly on Araxes 4, bringing with it the full fury of the storm. The acid rain no longer fell as gentle drops, but as stinging sheets that hissed against the outer layer of her shelter. Winds that had been merely strong during the day now howled with terrifying intensity, gusting well beyond 200 kilometers per hour, according to her estimation. Inside her shelter, Mara crouched, listening to the creaking and groaning of her basalt framework as it flexed under the assault. Water found its way through tiny imperfections in her construction, forming small droplets that ran down the interior curve of the dome. Carefully, she plugged leaks with small wads of root mat, repositioning herself to avoid the worst drips. A memory, surface training in Earth's monsoon mountains, where her survival instructor had forced cadets to build shelters against torrential downpours. Structure must breathe, yet hold, the grizzled veteran had insisted. Too rigid, it breaks. Too loose, it flies away. Mara had incorporated that wisdom into her design, creating a shelter that could flex slightly, with the wind's force, rather than standing rigidly against it. Now, as the storm raged at its peak, that decision was being tested to its limit. A particularly violent gust slammed into the dome, causing the entire structure to shudder. Mara braced herself, pushing back against the framework, feeling the lashings strain but hold. For a terrifying moment, she thought the shelter might collapse, but then the gust subsided, and the basalt beams settled back into position. Through the howling of the wind, she heard distant crashes and the high-pitched resonance of shattering crystal. The Kristen's shelters were failing, their rigid structures unable to withstand the battering. Similarly, metallic clangs suggested the Farron's magnetic constructions were coming apart. Hour after hour, the storm continued. Mara remained vigilant, constantly monitoring her shelter, making minor adjustments and reinforcements when needed. The acid rain seeped through in places, burning tiny holes in her expedition suit. But the thick root mat insulation absorbed much of it before it could reach her skin. Eventually, the storm's fury began to abate. The screaming winds decreased to merely strong gusts, and the acid rain lightened to the familiar drizzle of daytime. Mara allowed herself a brief moment of pride. Her shelter, with its root mat insulation and flexible basalt skeleton, had endured essentially intact. As dawn approached, Mara cautiously emerged from her shelter to survey the aftermath. The basin landscape had been transformed by the storm's new channels, carved by rushing water. Debris scattered everywhere, the very contours of the land altered in subtle ways. But the most dramatic changes were to the alien shelters. The Kristens lay amid broken crystal fragments, their shelters shattered by the wind's force. The Farron engineers huddled beneath the scattered remnants of their magnetic constructions, looking both bewildered and humiliated. The Varel were perhaps in the best condition of the three alien groups, thanks in part to Mara's donated lashing, though even their shelters showed significant damage, with many reduced to mere lean-tos that provided minimal protection. As Mara stood observing the scene, she made another decision. Walking to her shelter, she began carefully dismantling the rear section, the part she no longer needed now that the worst of the storm had passed. She separated out lashings and basalt fragments, creating a small pile of useful materials. Then, picking up these salvaged resources, she approached the nearest group of shivering Kristens. "Here," she said, setting down the materials. "These can be repurposed into basic lean-tos." She quickly demonstrated how to arrange the basalt fragments and secure them with the root mat lashings, creating a simple but effective barrier against the continuing acid drizzle. The Kristens stared at her in silence for a moment, their crystalline facets reflecting the dawn light in confused patterns. Then, their Ladera, particularly tall specimen with complex geometric protrusions, stepped forward. "Why assist competitors?" The translator drone rendered its chiming speech. Mara met its faceted gaze steadily. "Because survival isn't just about enduring, it's about adapting and cooperating." After a moment of what appeared to be internal deliberation, the Kristen commander extended a crystalline appendage in what Mara recognized as a gesture of acceptance. "I am Lirok," it chimed. "You build, not with might, but with understanding." Taking this as permission, Mara quickly showed the Kristens how to construct simple lean-tos using her salvaged materials combined with the fragments of their own shattered shelters. Once they grasped the technique, She moved on to the Farrens and finally to the Virel, teaching each group how to create basic protection against the continuing acid rain. As she worked, she noticed the drone monitors hovering silently, recording everything. Had she violated the non-collaboration rule beyond redemption? Perhaps. But something told her there was more to this trial than merely surviving alone. By mid-morning, much of the basin was dotted with small lean-tos built according to Mara's instruction. Aliens who had been competitors now worked side by side, adapting her human techniques to their own physiological needs and available materials. Lirok approached her again as she stood observing the transformation. "Your shelter survived when ours failed," the Christian admitted, its chimes subdued. "Our natural silicon structures should have been superior. Your bodies are perfectly adapted to your homeworld," Mara explained. "But adaptation is different from adaptability. Humans have survived on Earth by learning to adapt to hundreds of different environments." The Christian's facets shifted in what might have been thoughtful consideration. "And now you teach others to adapt as well." Before Mara could respond, the drone monitors suddenly activated in unison, their mechanized voices echoing across the basin. "Attention, survival candidates. The primary trial has concluded. All survivors, prepare for final evaluation." A strange silence fell over the basin as the alien cadets looked up at the drones, uncertainty evident in their postures and movements. In the distance, beyond the basin's edge, Mara noticed a massive wall of dark clouds approaching, a storm far more severe than the one they had just endured. Without warning, a brilliant beam of energy descended from the sky, enveloping Mara in a column of light. She felt her feet leave the ground as the tractor beam lifted her slowly upward. Around the basin, she saw similar beams descending to select other candidates, including Lirok and the Virel cadet she had assisted. As she rose higher, a holographic display materialized before her eyes. Candidate: Lieutenant Mara Hayes. Human structure. Integrity: 98% rule. Compliance: 85% compassion. Index: high leadership assessment. Exceptional status: selected for Coalition Officer Corps. The evaluation metrics confirmed what she had suspected. The trial had never been solely about individual survival. It had been about leadership, about the ability to balance self-preservation with compassion for others, about understanding when rules must bend to serve higher principles. Looking down, she saw the remaining alien cadets watching her ascent, no longer separated into their species groups, but gathered together beneath the makeshift lean-tos she had taught them to build. Their faces, whether crystalline, luminescent, or metallic, were turned upward, expressions of respect unmistakable despite their alien features. As the extraction beam pulled her aboard the waiting Coalition vessel, Mara reflected on what had truly been tested in the basin of Araxis Fu. Not merely the ability to endure a storm, but the wisdom to guide others through it. Not just the skill to build shelter for oneself, but the generosity to teach that skill to others. True survival, she realized, was never a solitary achievement. It was about ensuring that when the next storm came, everyone would have a better chance to weather it together. The extraction beam deposited her gently in a reception chamber, where Coalition officers, representatives of dozens of species, waited to greet the successful candidates. As she stepped forward to join their ranks, Mara carried with her not just the pride of having survived, but the deeper satisfaction of having helped others survive as well. In that moment, she knew that humanity had proven its worth to the Galactic Coalitions through superior technology or natural abilities, but through the uniquely human capacity to adapt, to teach, and to lead with both wisdom and compassion. And as the massive storm engulfed the basin below, Mara saw the alien cadets huddling together in their improvised shelters, no longer divided by species, no longer competing, but united in their shared struggle against the elements. It was an image that would stay with her throughout her Coalition service, a reminder that in the face of a hostile universe, cooperation was the most powerful survival strategy of all. Lieutenant Mara Hayes had arrived on Araxis 4 as humanity's representative. She departed as something more, a leader, whose legacy would be measured not just in her own survival, but in the lives she had touched and the knowledge she had shared. Beyond the viewport, the storm continued to rage across the basin, testing the makeshift shelters below. But this time, the aliens weren't facing it alone. This time, they had the knowledge Mara had given them, simple human wisdom about working with nature rather than against it, about flexibility versus rigidity, about the strength that comes from cooperation. And in that knowledge lay their best hope for survival. The coalition vessel accelerated away from Araxis 4, carrying Mara and the other selected candidates toward their future roles. But part of her remained behind, embodied in the shelters she had taught others to build, a human legacy on an alien world. Proof that sometimes the most valuable technology isn't technology at all, but rather the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who had learned to survive through understanding rather than force. Lieutenant Hayes, a coalition officer, approached, extending a greeting appendage. "Welcome aboard. Your performance was unexpected." Mara smiled slightly. "Thank you, Commander. The other successful candidates have been asking about your shelter design. They seem quite impressed by its simplicity and effectiveness." "I'd be happy to explain the principles," Mara replied. "Though the real lesson wasn't in the shelter itself, but in understanding the environment it needed to withstand." The commander's multifaceted eyes studied her with interest. "Indeed. That understanding appears to be something your species excels at, seeing patterns where others see only chaos." As they moved deeper into the vessel, joining the other candidates in a briefing chamber, Mara found herself seated beside Lirok, the Christan commander, who had initially dismissed her primitive methods. "The human teaches again?" Lirok chimed softly, gesturing toward the coalition officers gathered at the front of the chamber. "Always," Mara replied, "just as I hope to learn from you and the others. That's how we all improve." The Christan's facets shifted in what she now recognized as the equivalent of a thoughtful nod. "Your shelter, it moved with the wind rather than against it. My people build to last eternities, rigid and unchanging. Perhaps there is wisdom in flexibility." "And there's wisdom in your methods, too," Mara acknowledged. "The best solutions often come from combining different approaches." Their conversation was interrupted as the coalition commander called the chamber to attention, beginning a briefing on the next phase of their training. As Mara listened, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come, from standing alone at the edge of a hostile basin to sitting among the elite cadets selected for coalition leadership. She had arrived on Araxis 4 prepared to prove human resourcefulness through solitary survival. She departed having demonstrated something far more valuable: the human capacity to build bridges across species boundaries, to teach and learn in equal measure, and to lead not through dominance, but through service. The acid storms of Araxis 4 had tested more than her ability to construct a physical shelter. They had revealed the true strength of humanity, not in conquering hostile environments, but in helping others navigate them safely. Not in standing alone against the storm, but in ensuring that no one had to face it without shelter. As the coalition vessel accelerated toward its next destination, Mara Hayes carried that lesson with her: truth more valuable than any technology, more durable than any shelter. True survival was never just about weathering the storm yourself, but about guiding others through it as well. In the vastness of space, among countless alien civilizations with technologies and natural abilities far beyond human capacity, this was humanity's unique contribution to the Galactic Coalition, the wisdom to understand that we are stronger together than apart, and that compassion need never be sacrificed in the name of survival. For Lieutenant Mara Hayes, that knowledge would guide her steps through whatever trials lay ahead, a compass pointing always toward a future where differences were not barriers, but strengths, where competition gave way to cooperation, and where leadership was measured not in power wielded, but in knowledge shared. The storm had passed. The lesson remained. The morning after their extraction from Araxis 4, the newly selected coalition officer candidates gathered for their first formal assembly. Mara entered the chamber to find it arranged in a circular formation, with representatives of over a dozen species seated according to their physiological needs, aquatic beings in specialized tanks, high-gravity species on reinforced platforms, and various atmospheric requirements accommodated through localized environmental fields. Lerock noticed her entrance and gestured to an empty space beside him. As Mara took her seat, she noticed the virile cadet she had assisted was also nearby, its skin glowing with a calm blue that indicated comfort and confidence. A stark contrast to the desperate purple-red she had seen during the storm. "The human joins the silicon," chimed Lerock, with what Mara now recognized as a dry humor in the translated tone. "Our instructors seem pleased by unexpected alliances." Before Mara could respond, the central dais illuminated, and a coalition high commander materialized, a Meridian, one of the founding species of the Galactic Coalition. Its translucent, multi-limbed form shifted through patterns of light that served as both communication and emotional expression. Candidates. The Meridian's thoughts translated directly through neural interfaces. You have survived the first trial, but survival alone was never our objective. The chamber quieted as the commander's form pulsed with emphasis. The Coalition does not seek officers who merely endure. We seek those who understand the fundamental principle that has allowed our alliance to flourish among the stars. Unity through diversity. Images appeared around the chamber recordings from the Araxis I-4 trial. Mara saw herself emerging from her intact shelter, surveying the damage around her, then deliberately dismantling part of her own successful structure to share with others. "Lieutenant Hayes of Earth," the commander continued, its form brightening. "Your species is new to our coalition. Many questioned whether humans, with your limited natural abilities and relatively basic technology, could contribute meaningfully to our alliance." Mara sat straighter, feeling the eyes of every alien candidate turn toward her. "Your performance has provided a compelling answer. When faced with a hostile environment, you did not simply survive. You elevated survival to leadership. You transformed competition into cooperation." The commander's form shifted to include snippets of every candidate's experience on Araxis 4. Each of you selected today demonstrated exceptional qualities. The Kristans showed remarkable structural engineering. The Virel displayed adaptive biology. The Farans utilized natural magnetic manipulation with precision. The images coalesced back to Mara, teaching the aliens how to build lean-tos from salvaged materials. But Lieutenant Hayes showed us something equally valuable: the ability to synthesize basic principles into solutions that transcend species boundaries. To teach rather than dominate. To lead through service rather than authority. The Meridian commander expanded to fill the center of the chamber, its light touching each candidate in turn. This is the essence of coalition leadership, recognizing that true strength lies not in individual excellence alone, but in our capacity to combine our unique perspectives into something greater than any single species could achieve. The briefing continued, outlining the next phases of their training and the responsibilities they would assume as coalition officers. But for Mara, the commander's words lingered, affirming what she had intuited during those crucial moments on Araxis 4, that humanity's greatest contribution to the galactic community might not be technological innovation or military might, but rather their adaptability, creativity, and capacity for building connections across seemingly insurmountable differences. Later, as the candidates dispersed to their assigned quarters, Mara found herself walking alongside a Farran engineer whose magnetic shelter had collapsed early in the storm. "Your shelter design," The Farron's metallic voice resonated through its translator. It appears primitive at first assessment, yet it incorporated principles of flexibility and environmental harmony that our magnetic constructions lacked. Mara nodded. Humans learned early in our development that working with natural forces often yields better results than trying to overpower them. A philosophy worth consideration, the Farron acknowledged. Perhaps in our next training scenario, we might exchange insights. Not collaboration, of course. Merely professional dialogue. Mara smiled. I'd welcome that, engineer. Varix, the Farron supplied. And I have already begun analyzing the structural properties of your basalt and fiber design. Most fascinating. As they reached the junction where their paths would separate, Varix hesitated. One query remains. Lieutenant Hayes, when you assisted the Varel cadet, you risked disqualification. Why? Mara considered the question carefully. Because sometimes the right action matters more than the right outcome, she finally answered. I couldn't know if helping would help or harm my chances. I only knew that I couldn't watch someone suffer when I had the means to help. The Farron's exoskeleton shifted in what might have been thoughtful consideration. An inefficient calculation by logical standards. But a very human one, Mara replied with a slight smile. Indeed. Varix's translator conveyed what might have been respect. Perhaps there is efficiency in your inefficiency after all. Lieutenant Hayes. The Coalition seems to think so. As the Farron continued toward its magnetically shielded quarters, Mara reflected on how quickly alliances were forming among species that had been competitors only days before. The Araxis IV trial had broken down barriers more effectively than any diplomatic initiative, forcing each candidate to recognize the value in perspectives different from their own. In her own quarters, designed to approximate Earth standard conditions, Mara reviewed the Coalition training materials provided for the next phase. The challenges ahead would be complex, requiring technical expertise, tactical thinking, and diplomatic skill. But underlying all of these requirements was the fundamental principle the Meridian Commander had emphasized: unity through diversity. Humanity was the newest member of this vast galactic community, with much to learn from species whose civilizations had spanned millennia. Yet the Araxis IV trial had proven that humans also had something valuable to contribute, a unique perspective born from their evolutionary history as adaptable generalists rather than specialized experts. As she prepared for sleep in the artificial Earth-night cycle of her quarters, Mara found herself thinking of all the survival instructors who had trained her back on Earth, from the deserts of Arizona to the Arctic tundra, from rainforest to mountain peak. Each environment had taught her different lessons, forced her to adapt in different ways. That breadth of experience, the human legacy of facing countless environmental challenges throughout their planetary history, had given her an advantage on Araxis IV that no specialized adaptation could match. Not because humans were superior in any particular aspect, but because they had learned to integrate knowledge across domains, to see patterns in seemingly unrelated challenges, to build bridges between different ways of thinking. Perhaps that was humanity's true gift to the Coalition. Any specific technology or ability, but their capacity to serve as connectors, translators between specialized perspectives, synthesizers of diverse approaches into unified solutions. With that thought, Lieutenant Mara Hayes drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with images of basalt shelters built on alien worlds, of crystal beings learning human techniques, of a future where species that evolved on planets circling different stars could nonetheless find common ground in the shared challenge of survival. And in that shared challenge, perhaps they would discover what humans had learned through countless generations of struggle on their home planet: that compassion was not a luxury to be set aside in times of hardship, but rather the very foundation of lasting survival. The storm had tested their shelters. The true test had revealed their characters. And in that revelation lay the promise of a coalition stronger than any that had come before, one built not on mere tolerance of differences, but on the active celebration of diverse perspectives, united in common purpose. Lieutenant Mara Hayes slept soundly, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring.